Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Andy Fix. I'm a volunteer naturalist here at the Cincinnati Nature Center, and I would like to welcome you to Ask a Naturalist. Our topic today is winter birds, and I'd like to kick everything off with a few thoughts on how birds survive winter. We want you to ask questions and send us questions online if things come to mind, and we have some questions already that we've received from folks. So what we're going to talk about really applies to birds wherever you see them in the winter, here at a feeder, maybe in your backyard, or if you're out taking a walk, either a casual walk or actually doing a bird walk. So I brought along this little toolbox because I wanted to make sure I remembered to say, and this is probably not going to be a real surprise, that there are lots of tools that birds can use to survive winter. Now, birds have a number of energy needs just like we do. Their body temperature is actually higher than ours. It's 5 or 6 degrees higher than ours, and because food isn't very available in the winter, that creates a real challenge for them to survive. So let's look at how they do that. They use things about their bodies and things about their behavior which help them survive winter. In the fall, most birds will undergo a molt and they'll put on a winter coat, and there are some birds that will actually have more feathers for the winter than they do during the rest of the year. And in particular, they may put on down, which is the very dense feathers close to their bodies, which they use for insulation. They also will feed very actively in the fall. They'll put on body fat. They're done with their breeding, and they can use their energy and their time to put on some body fat. The other thing that's pretty interesting that birds can do in the winter is on winter nights when they're roosting, they can actually lower their body temperature. And they can do this quite amazingly, and it can actually get quite cold. They also have ways to keep their legs and feet from freezing, even though they don't let as much heat go out the blood into their legs and feet as they have in their bodies, and they can retain body heat that way. So in addition to these ways about their bodies, they have other behaviors that they can use as well. For example, and it's really coincidental and timely, birds have behaviors just like we do. When we're cold, we want to cuddle and huddle together. We can puff up under a blanket. And sometimes you'll even see birds put their heads under their wings. And the news leaf showed this really nicely with this beautiful little picture of the bluebirds in the winter doing this. Also, like us, birds will shiver. Shivering generates body heat from internal muscles. And they seek shelter, particularly on cold winter nights, in cavities in trees. They'll use natural cavities. They'll use woodpecker holes. They'll even share a woodpecker nest hole, and they use birdhouses. And if you are like me, sometimes open a bluebird house during the winter, I've found lots of droppings in there with seeds and nuts in there that really shows that the birds have been using those birdhouses for shelter. One other thing that birds do in terms of their behavior for surviving winter is the way they feed and forage. So some of our songbirds will actually form little flocks that are mixed species, different kinds of birds together. These flocks are led by chickadees and titmice, and they're joined by downy woodpeckers and nuthatches, and they'll move through the forest. And this kind of explains why sometimes when you're out in the woods in the winter, it's real quiet, and then suddenly there's all these little birds around. Well, that means you've encountered one of these feeding flocks. And some of those birds will store their food in a process called caching. And again, the chickadees and the titmice and the jays and some of the crows have really good memories, and they can remember for months where they've put their food. So these are just some of the things that birds can do to survive winter. And I want to go back to the toolbox and have you think about one of the most important tools that the birds have is their beaks. And you can use your powers of observation to look at their beaks to figure out how they feed. So there are birds that have very heavy beaks, like our finches and our sparrows, for cracking nuts and seeds. and they tend to stay on the ground where feed is scattered either under your bird feeder or out in the woods. And then there's other birds with sharper beaks, like woodpeckers that have a chisel beak, and even our chickadees and titmice are good at hammering seeds open, and they're the ones that will fly off the feeders, go off into a tree, hammer that seed open, and then they can decide whether to eat it on the spot or put it away for safekeeping. So some thoughts on winter birds and how they survive, and hopefully we've got some questions that have come in. So what do you want to do next? Questions?
Jake had submitted the question. Jake Faulkner submitted the question about crows in winter.
Crows in winter, right. Yeah, we got that question. So the question was around crows in winter, how their social behavior and some of their feeding habits help them survive. So crows are in this group of birds that I just mentioned. Jays and crows are very smart birds. I think a lot of you guys know how smart they are. Crows in particular will form large roosts. So they stay together, sometimes in the thousands of birds, and they will have regular patterns where they will go out and they will find feed, and they'll feed together, and then they also are very adaptable. If you've ever seen crows feeding on a roadkill carcass, particularly in the winter, they eat garbage, they eat trash, they eat roadkill, they'll eat just about anything. So they're pretty good at knowing how to survive winter.
We have a question from Pam Doyle, who wanted to know that if it's okay to put birdseed directly on the ground, or do we have to use feeders? Oh,
so the question is, can you put birdseed on the ground or use feeders? I think both are fine. I think that different birds, like I kind of alluded to, are going to be more adapted to finding food in those different places. So some birds are more comfortable flying into a feeder and then flying back into the woods because they feel safer doing that. And then other birds like mourning doves and a lot of our sparrows, they're kind of designed to be on the ground. So I think feeding them on the ground is just fine.
We had another question that was, what are some of the, Satya is asking, what are some of the common winter birds that we see in Cincinnati?
Oh, okay. So that's a good question. So the question is about winter birds. So obviously, some of you that are kind of birders know that in winter, there are birds that show up that we don't have the rest of the year. And the reason for that is, you think about our bird populations, we have a set of permanent resident birds like cardinals, blue jays, that are around all year round. We've got birds that are here in the spring and summer to breed, and they fly away. But there's also birds that come in the winter because they breed further north. So birds like dark-eyed juncos, white-throated sparrows, yellow-bellied sapsuckers, brown creepers, and some of our other birds are showing up here only in the winter because that's where they winter, and they spend most of the time further north.
We had another question is, how do birds find water, or how do they survive without water in like frozen areas?
Okay, how do birds survive in the frozen areas? So they'll eat snow, and they'll get water, moisture out of what they eat. Some birds are pretty good at finding water, and our water birds, kingfishers and things, will be around here, and even herons, even some great blue herons will be here in the winter. So long as there's a small open creek somewhere, sometimes you can find those birds around here in the winter. But one thing that's good to remember that when you're feeding birds is also to provide them a source of water. And it would be a good thing to put a bird bath out, and you can get little heaters to put in a bird bath, and they'll really appreciate that, and just keep everything clean.
Julia asked, it seems as if many of our birds left this summer and fall. We had way less than normal. Why could that be?
So the question was around an observer thought that we had less birds in the spring and the fall. I'm not really sure how to explain that. I don't know if that's something that was really widespread and whether or not people really thought that was the case. Mm-hmm. But certainly there are shifts in bird populations that can account for that kind of a thing. Birds can come and go with weather fronts. So there could be a lot of birds around here at one time, and then if a cold front comes through, then all the birds that were here can get swept away with those weather fronts.
Okay. And let's see. Patty Kraft said, let's talk about snowy owls. I saw that one was spotted out at East Fork Lake yesterday. Is it likely that he or she will stick around?
That's a really good question.
Any precautions to take when observing?
Oh, okay, yes. So Patty asked about the snowy owl that was seen at East Fork. So let me tell you a little bit about snowy owls. So they are tundra birds that live way up in the tundra where there's no trees, and they eat small rodents up there. They will come down here in large numbers, relatively large numbers, periodically when their food is somewhat limited, and they can show up anywhere. They can be just moving around a lot, depending on where they find food. But if they find a good spot where there's lots of mice and voles for them to eat, they can hang around in one spot for a long time. In fact, last winter, there was a snowy owl at Alum Creek Reservoir in Columbus for 3 months. And so the one that showed up here at the dam at East Fork Lake, only that bird knows what he's going to be doing, but there is a chance if he finds food he could be around for a long time. And I would caution people to be a little careful around how close you get to an owl like that, because they are an example of a species that's not around people a lot, so they can be approached sometimes too close because they're just not used to people.
Pam Doyle would like to know, what are the biggest predators for birds?
Biggest predators for birds, I would say one of the biggest predators for birds are other birds. So there are several hawks, which are probably the biggest bird predators. Cooper's hawks and sharp-shinned hawks are in the accipiter group, and they love to hang around bird feeders. And so in a way, if you're feeding birds, you're also feeding hawks, thanks to the food chain. The other predators, I would say, which are of concern are cats. And there's a tremendous amount of information out there about the impact of cats on bird populations.
Okay, let's see. Satya asked, do house sparrows, migrate south in the winter?
So the question is, do house sparrows migrate south in the winter? And I guess I'd say, unfortunately, not. They're pretty much permanent residents, and as most of us know, they're pretty good at being successful just about anywhere, mostly in urban and suburban areas. If you get out in the country, there's probably not as many house sparrows, but they don't really migrate.
And let's see. Jake Faulkner has another question.
Okay.
He would like to know, what do birds like pheasants and turkeys do to survive the winter?
Okay, so this is about turkeys and pheasants surviving. So birds that are not around feeders or that we're typically used to seeing that are out in the woods or in the grassland will just pretty well know what kind of food that they need to find. They will be in certain territories, and pheasants are real good at hiding in grasslands and edge habitat, and they'll find grains and they'll eat berries and fruit. Pretty well follow around their food sources in order to survive over the winter.
And Judy asked, why is a singlerufus hummingbird hanging around in this area at this time of the year? So
the question is about rufous hummingbirds. So a little bit about hummingbirds. The common hummingbird we have all in eastern North America is the ruby-throated hummingbird. There are a number of hummingbirds in the West, and the rufous hummingbird is one of those. It's a smaller bird, and it is becoming more and more common for it to fly from the west to the east to winter. And it's seen a lot in the southeastern part of the U.S. and sometimes in Ohio. And these birds will, if they find a feeder, and if the people are feeding them, they can stay for quite a long time. And again, hummingbirds can go into what's called torpor. They can actually get like totally frozen at night. and survive really cold winter nights and then heat themselves up to recover and hopefully find some food the next day.
John asked, is there anything I can do to attract a pileated woodpecker? We see one on very rare occasions in our woods.
So the question is around attracting pileated woodpeckers. You know, I really don't know if there's a food preference for pileated woodpeckers or not. That's a good question. Maybe we can check into that. I know that I've seen pictures of pileated woodpeckers on feeders, and I don't know if they like suet more than other things. They probably do. I know a lot of woodpeckers like suet.
Anecdotally, we had a pileated family that was
okay.
on our peanut feeder. Right out
Peanut
here.
feeders. Okay. Right here at the right here.
And they were
okay.
feeding a juvenile.
Oh, okay. So peanuts or peanut butter? Peanut butter? Peanuts. Okay. So maybe peanuts will work. You can try that.
And I think that's the last question.
Last question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, wait. How can I attract more birds to my feeder? Satya is asking.
How can you attract more birds? Okay, so I would think of that both in terms of the diversity of food that you offer and where you put it in your yard. So if you think about habitat, you could put some feeders a little closer to trees, but you got to make sure that the squirrels can't jump off the trees. Of course, that's a problem. And then if you have more open areas, you could maybe put platform feeders down or an open area for ground feeders. So think about the structure of your yard and where to feed birds, and then also think about the different types of food. So you think about high quality food for birds like cardinals and finches. Safflower and black oil sunflower seeds are good. You get tube feeders with thistle for finches, goldfinches and house finches. And then ground birds, you can maybe use a little lower quality food like the millets and maybe cracked corn and that kind of a thing. So that would be maybe the way to think about that.
And Julia would like to know, what is the best type of suet to buy?
The best type of suet. So I don't know a whole lot about different types of suet. I always just buy the prepackaged high density ones that come in, they're all preformed to fit in the suet feeders that you can buy. There's a tremendous number of different kinds of those. They mix different types of seeds in them. There's woodpecker and mixed. I don't really know if there's a whole lot of difference in those, but I think that buying those preformed things is probably just easier than trying to go and get actual bulk suet from a butcher or something like that.
Okay. Pam asked, and this kind of ties into that, other than birdseed, what could we put out to feed birds?
Other than birdseed, okay, so mealworms can be put out for bluebirds. You could put out fruits and berries for other non-seed eating birds like thrushes, robins, cedar waxwings. I even heard some here today as I was walking into the building. So there's a whole group of birds that will hang around here in the winter that prefer fruits and berries over seeds. They can adapt if they have to. So you could put that out as well. And don't forget water. That's important for all of them as well.
Okay. And let's see. Jake has another question. Aside from sandhill cranes, Canada geese, and double-crested cormorants, what are some other birds that pass through the area on their migratory routes around this time of year?
So sandhill cranes, geese, cormorants are all migrants. So the question is, what other birds are migrating around this time of year? So if we think about water birds, a lot of the water birds are migrating, and in addition to the ones mentioned, you've got ducks, you've got loons, and you've got grebes. There's a whole sets of water birds which are migrating, and they are pretty good at, as long as there's large open bodies of water, like some of these other birds will hang around. Though you can find those birds around here, like East Fork Lake, gulls and gulls as well. You can find all those birds here in the winter as long as there's open water. when things freeze up in really cold winters, then you just think about the ice pattern, and those birds are forced to go south until they can find open water, and then they'll stay there. And then as things thaw out, they'll kind of move back up.
Satya had another question. Does removing dead plants in winter cause fewer birds to visit feeders? Less birds are coming to our feeders after we removed plants that died from frost.
Okay. So this is around removing plants that have died from frost or other types of vegetation, and does that decrease the amount of birds that you might have in around your feeders? And I would say there's probably a chance that it does. So those plants may have food associated with them that, even though it's not obvious, there may be things that the birds are eating. But in particular, it will reduce cover. And cover is very important for the birds to hide from predators. And as I mentioned, when we kick this off, places to roost. A little bit out of the wind, in the middle of some brush, it can make a big difference on the ability of a bird to actually live overnight.
I think that was the last question. Don't see any more popping up.
Anything else?
January 9th is your program.
Oh yes. So one thing, if you're interested in more about birds in winter, we have a program in January, on January 9th. That's a Sunday afternoon. It's an online program, and I'm going to be working with one of our naturalists here, Aaron Mullen, who is going to work together with me, and we are going to talk about winter birds, probably explore some of the things here that we've already talked about, and maybe show some pictures as well.
And I think that's it. If you want
Okay.
to do one last call for questions.
Any more questions, anybody? And if you and by the way, if you have other things that come to mind afterwards, send an email.
Yeah, can you message us right through Facebook?
Send it right through Facebook, and I'm sure I'll get it, and I promise I'll make an attempt to give an answer.
Yep. All right. I think we're all good.
Okay. Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks for watching.